Hello everyone, I'm here today to talk about my favorite books of 2023. It's a mix between fiction and non-fiction, and they are in total 7 books. I never try to put a certain number of books that I want to talk about in these videos, and it just happens to be 7 this year. So let's just get into it. So this is, I think, the first book I read this year, and that is Flights by Olga Tokarczuk. And yeah, I still am amazed at how good she can talk about anything really. She's super intelligent, she's super snarky, and this book, I have seen it described as short stories. I do not think it's short stories, but it's kind of like snippets of this woman's lives and like thoughts, things that she thinks about, which I think it's a bit of autofiction of the author as well. And she just talks about travel most of the time in all kinds of things, like travel through your body, travel like physically, travel through time, all these kinds of things. And she's just so smart, and I think this is one that at some point I would have to reread because it's a difficult one to get along with, and I would not recommend it to every person that I meet. But I think it's very literary and very smart, and there's so much packed into this that I have not absorbed, because it cannot be absorbed in one reading. That I think I might need to reread this one. But yeah, overall I love her stuff. I love this book. The next one I want to talk to you about is one I read for the International Booker, and that is Stillborn by Guadalupe Benetel. This is probably my favorite of all of them, although playing favorites with this is very difficult. But this is a book about two women that are friends, and they both, when they are young, they thought they didn't want to have children, but then one of them ends up in a situation in which she actually wants to have children, and the other one still keeps her idea that she doesn't want children. And so the one that has this is narrated from the perspective of the one that didn't want to have children, but then her friend is actually having a really hard time to get pregnant, and she also has a really hard time with the pregnancy and with the baby for reasons that are out of her control. And it's a really tender book because it shows how people can change minds, how it's not a black and white, it's also not like this biological clock. I think that the representation and the discussion around motherhood in this book is excellent. I think it's very, very well done. I read this in Spanish. I do not have an idea of how good the translation is, but I have seen people praising this as well outside Spanish-speaking world, so I think it should be good. And yeah, it's again one of them that I read it in audiobook, and I think I read it in 2 days, and it made me cry so much because of all those feelings, complicated feelings towards motherhood and towards children and all of that. And yeah, it's a very great book. And then another one that I read for the International Booker that actually won is Time Shelter by Gregory Gospodinov. I don't have my copy because I gifted it to a friend, but this was, I think that the thing that I don't think this is a perfect novel, but I think that what struck me the most is the fact that it's about ideas. So it follows these two characters that decide that one of the best ways to deal with Alzheimer's is to put the patients in places where the environment is where they were happiest, and so they lose their memory less because they have all the things that they love and they remember around them. And that seems to go well, and then this idea expands into everybody that wants to experience that. And then it expands even further into whole countries that decide to go back into a certain time frame. And each country in Europe holds a referendum about which decade they want to be going back to. And it's very interesting, all the conversations about how each country in Europe experience different decades. It's all in the 1900s, so it's like from 1910 or 1920 all the way up to 1990. And they also have these conversations about, okay, so if one country is in a certain decade and another one in another one, how are they going to interact? But also, if you decide that you want to be in the 1920s, are you going to take all the electronics away from everybody? How is that going to work? It was a very interesting philosophical exercise, and I liked it for that. Again, I don't think it's a perfect book, and as a novel, I know that a lot of people struggle with the novel aspect of it because it's just about ideas, but I love these philosophical ideas of let's make a thought experiment. So that's why I love that book as well. Those were the three fiction books that made it to my favorites. There is one book that I don't know how to qualify, but it's Jaltok, Poems from a Marshallese Daughter by Jetnill Kijiner, which, as the title would suggest, is a poetry collection. And I'm normally not one for poetry, but this really hit me hard. It's so amazing. Like she's so fiery and so feisty, and she's also very proud of her ancestry, and she wants to share that with the world, but the world sees it in a quite racist light, so that's difficult for her. And actually, last week, completely unrelated, I went to a museum with my family, and the Ethnographic Museum of Leiden, and in their Oceania part um, they have a screen, and she talks in that screen. She does spoken poetry, and it's not any of the poems here, but it's like the same fire. And just seeing her like recite her poetry was amazing. I would love to do that in person, of course, but even in video was amazing, and I want to search more from her because I did not expect this to end up in my favorites. And yeah, it's one of the best things that has come out of my Read Around the World challenge, because otherwise I would have never picked this up. So yeah, really recommend. And now, with that said, we can move on to the non-fiction. That's another three books that I have in this list. The first one is The Patriarchs by Angela Saini. I love everything Angela Saini does. She's so smart. This one in particular is debunking the idea of patriarchy and the fact that it's a natural thing. Because, I mean, one of the theses that she explored is not the only one, but one of the theses that she explores in this book is the fact that people kind of say that patriarchy is kind of natural because when we were hunter-gatherers, it was common that the women will stay behind with the babies because of the natural way how babies are made, and like breastfeeding and stuff. And the men would go hunting because they were the ones that didn't have to take care of the children because they couldn't breastfeed and they couldn't grow them in the womb. So that was like naturally patriarch because that made sense. There's also the theory that one man can have many children in a short amount of time and women can't. So there is like some arguments that say that these kind of things are why a patriarchal system makes more sense. And Angela Saini gives examples of why this is not the case, why there are also other cultures that are not patriarchal, are other societies. And if it was so natural, then everyone would be patriarchal. And then other theories like that. Also, there's some social theories that say that women are naturally emotional, and that's why they have to be tamed by men and all of this stuff. And how all these ideas are not real, and we're just basing a society on something that is not real, and we shouldn't let that happen. And it also goes into how patriarchy affects day-to-day life for women, and both women and men. And it's very smart. She's very smart, and I recommend this as well. I don't think it got the buzz that it deserves. I think her other books, Inferior and Superior, which are about the science of racism and the science of women being the inferior women, being the inferior sex, are also bullshit. And yeah, this is kind of like in the same line. And it came out last year, I believe. It was nominated for the Orwell Prize for nonfiction. But I haven't heard that many people talk about it, and I think it deserves more praise. So here's my praise. Then the next one I want to talk about is Violent Phenomena, and this is a collection of essays by different people. And it's published by the Access Press, and it's basically essays about translation and about how translation can be colonizing and racist, basically. And I found this fascinating. I read it at the beginning of the year and I haven't stopped thinking about it. About, for example, how translators with white sounding names have a lot more work in general than translators with more ethnic, if you want to call it like that, names. Even though there are people that are bilingual, like that's normally the people that are completely bilingual, right? Like if someone is from, let's say, Japan and they grow up in the US, they know both languages quite maturely, and that would be ideally the people that can translate things better. But because they have, let's say, Japanese name or Chinese or Korean or whatever, then it is assumed that they will not speak English to the same level as a person with a white sounding name. Things like that. Also talks about how when you translate, there are some decisions that translators make on how much they explain and how much they adapt the original text, and how much you adapt it. It's also kind of a colonial exercise, because you're trying to adapt another language to your own sensibilities, and we don't expect people to have to be explained things when we are talking about the US or the UK, because we are assumed to know everything. Like I have that, for example, with Wolf Hall. I do enjoy Hilary Mantel, but that book does not explain much about the history of England, and there is kind of like an underlying assumption that everyone will know about that. And the reviews I see online are mostly about how good the book is, which is good. But then, for example, if you go to the books of Jacob by Olga Tokarczuk, it's a very similar thing. It's about the history of Poland and like the eastern part of Europe, and it also doesn't explain a lot about the background of that region and their history, and it assumes a certain amount of knowledge there. And I saw many reviews talking about how much they struggled through that book because there was no prior knowledge there, which is fine. All of that is fine, but that's like, we do assume that in certain English speaking books that there is a prior knowledge there, whereas when with translated fiction, sometimes we, like the translators, are pushed into explaining that further so that it's more approachable for white audiences. And I found those kind of things very interesting. There's lots of things like that. It's also some of the sections are kind of experimental. So you can see, for example, this one, and I don't remember exactly what it stands for, but it was kind of like the actual text that they were writing and like the ideas around it or something like that. I don't remember exactly anymore, but it's kind of experimental in some parts, and yeah, I really, really, really love this book, and I think more people need to read it as well. And then the last book that I have is Eating to Extinction by Dan Saladino, and this goes through a list of different foods that are disappearing, and how important it is to try to keep it alive, for the sake of diversity and the sake of surviving surviving through the climate crisis, because certain crops, for example, would be more will be more resistant in certain conditions, and because the conditions are changing, we should keep everything as much as we can, so that we can make use of it, but also because it has cultural value as well, and we should also keep it for that. And he talks in the introduction actually about how we think that we have a very diverse culture when it comes to food, because we can have like sushi or Indian food or Indonesian food or whatever, but actually food is becoming more reduced because it's more and more globalized. So yes, we can have all these different cuisines, but we can get those same cuisines everywhere. So it doesn't matter if you're in New York, if you're in London, if you're in Delhi, if you're in Japan, you can get all of the different foods that we think are diverse. And he talks more about like how diversity should be a local thing, and that's kind of like what this is about. It can get a little bit samey at points, because I think it's 12 foods, or no, it's more than that. It goes through 34 different foods, and so it can get a little bit samey talking about the food for a few pages and then another food for a few pages and so on and so on. But I also found that in between all those things, he also speaks a lot about more global issues and more global aspects of it, and more nuanced discussions using those elements, but it's not just a list of foods that are being endangered, if you know what I mean. So yeah, I found it very insightful, and I found it very, very useful for me to get a better idea on this topic, which is something I wanted to know more about. So yeah, those are all the books that ended up in my best books of 2023. Let me know if you have read any of these, if you like them or didn't like them, if you are planning to read any of them. And until next video, bye!